Hey, what's up, y'all? It's your boy Preston here, and this is a quick preview and prediction for, Gary Antoine Russell versus Andy Hiroaka, and basically, and shit like that. This is definitely gonna be a good fight, and stuff like that. Definitely looking forward to that fight, and stuff like that, and and yeah. But Gary Anton Russell comes into this fight on a record of 18 wins, 1 loss, 17 wins coming by way of knockout. Andy Hiroka comes into this fight of a record of 24 wins, 0 losses, with 19 wins coming by way of knockout. But this dude has not fought in since I believe it was 2024 or 2023 it's been, so it's been a minute since Andy Hiroka has been in the ring. But still, so yeah. But this is definitely going to be a very tough fight, and stuff like that, in my opinion, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff. Hey, calm down, guys. But this is gonna be a very good fight, and stuff like that, you know what I mean, between each other and stuff like that, But as you can see though, Andy Hiroka has the size advantage. Oh, Andy Hiroka has the size advantage over over Gary Antoine Russell, and stuff like that, and he has, the reach advantage and everything and stuff like that, so and he definitely knows how to throw his punches at a high volume and stuff like that, So we're gonna see if how Gary Antoine Russell can handle that, because as we seen in the fight with Rancis Barthélemy, when we seen in the fight with and we seen in the fight and stuff like that, with Rancis Barthélemy, and we seen in the fight uh with um who else and stuff like that he fought, and stuff like that he, was struggling with this. Oh, Alberto Puello, and stuff like that, and those two fights, like obviously in the Alberto Puello fight, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like, he, lost that fight, and shit like that, but but that's an example of why he was struggling and shit, because he couldn't get away from that jab and stuff like that, of Alberto Puello at all, and shit like that, you know what I mean? Like, he couldn't get away from that jab of Alberto Puello, and shit like that, Alberto Puello was just owning him and stuff like that, with that jab and stuff. And then, but then with Rancis Barthélemy, he isn't really a complete, like, boxer like that, like at a high level, but he still, was making, Gary Antoine Russell struggle at, fighting, from distance and stuff, But at the same time, though, Gary Antoine Russell still got the job done, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing to consider and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But this is going to be another big test for him, and stuff like that, But he still did put up a pretty good fight against a really good fight, against Alberto Puello. But I thought, I thought Puello clearly won that fight, in my opinion, and stuff like that. I had it like some like 8 rounds to 4, maybe 7 rounds to 5 in favor of but I'm gonna say like 8 rounds to 4 in favor of Alberto Puello, and shit like that, like it, like even though he was fighting hard, but I just felt like, just Alberto Puello was just handling business very well, with the distance management, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And yeah, and stuff like that, but overall and stuff like that, as long as he can be able to, minimize the distance, quick, without having to cause so much damage to himself, and giving more, ups to the other fighter and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Then Gary Antoine Russell, can most definitely get in, and try to get those punches in and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing. But yeah, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? So if he can do that and stuff like that, with with managing to get through the distance, quick and land his power shots, and stuff like that, and dictate the fight, and stuff like that, and everything else of what I said and stuff like that, and stuff, of where basically everything else of what I said, and stuff like that. Where like, where he can overcome, where he can be able to fight well against distance fighters, which he can. And overall in this fight, which definitely will benefit him in this fight and stuff like that, is that is that Andy Hiroaka and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like, he hasn't fought in like like 2 to 3 years, maybe even like 4 years, but he hasn't fought in a while, and shit like that. Let me go look. Andy Hiroka, he hasn't fought in 2 years, so that's gonna be something that's gonna, you know, definitely sting, and shit, and that's gonna be something that's gonna benefit Gary Antuanne Russell. But anyways and shit like that, onto and actually, and shit like that, I'm just gonna do a quick little prediction and shit like that also of the Amir Albright fight, and stuff like that, or the Anir Albright, or however you say his name and shit like that, um, but yeah, and shit like that, you know what I mean, and basically and stuff like that, that's the thing. But with Andy Hiroka, what he got to do and shit like that, hopefully he's ready for this fight, and stuff, so there could be an entertaining fight, but what he got to do is be a good distance manager, and shit like that, and distance the fight, and shit like that, from Gary Antuanne Russell and stuff like that, uh utilize good power punching and shit like that, you know what I mean, and overall Andy Hiroka also got, it's got some ring IQ and shit like that, you know what I mean? So he knows how to fight smart, knows how to pick his shots wisely and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, so overall and shit like that, you know what I mean? And yeah, and if he does all of that and shit like that, in this fight, and stuff like that, and utilizes his footwork, show levels with his footwork against Gary Antuanne Russell, then he can definitely, have an advantage more to winning this fight, in my opinion, than Gary Antuanne Russell. Hold on, guys. So yeah, footwork is definitely key and stuff like that when it comes down to this and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And that's the thing for Andy Hiroka. But then power punching, volume, straight shots, keep keep Gary Antuanne Russell at distance, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And and that's the thing and stuff like that, But overall, I think this is gonna make a very tough fight, in my opinion, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And overall, like, it's just like, you know, I'm just saying this is gonna make a very tough fight, man. In my opinion, a really tough fight, and shit like that. You know what I mean? And and that's the thing and shit like that, But overall and stuff like that, I do think this fight is gonna be a close fight and shit like that. You know what I mean? I'm gonna say like, I'm gonna say the early rounds is gonna be in favor of I think the early rounds is gonna be in favor of I mean, I don't know how Andy Hiroka is going to be able to do and shit like that, But, so I'm going to just give the early rounds to Gary Antuanne Russell. But actually, I'm going to give that to Andy Hiroka. I'm going to give the early rounds to Andy Hiroka. I'm going to give I'm going to give the mid rounds to Gary Antuanne Russell. And then after that, I'm going to say the later rounds are gonna be is gonna be a draw, and stuff like that, Or actually, no, I'm gonna say, Gary Antoine Russell is gonna win, the mid to later rounds, in my opinion. Like the one thing also and shit like that, is, let's see how Andy Hiroka is gonna be able. But honestly, with Asian fighters, bro, like they have great cardio and shit like that. But let's see how good his cardio is gonna be, and shit like that. You know what I mean? Heading into the later rounds, with handling that nonstop pressure of Gary Antoine Russell. Because honestly, like Gary Antoine Russell can still get himself a stoppage, and shit like that, in this fight, in my opinion, and stuff like that, and and that's the thing and stuff like that, you know what I mean? So yeah, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Uh so yeah, man, and shit like that, so he most definitely can get a stoppage in this fight, and stuff like that, if he dictates it well and shit like that, and also if, Andy Hiroka actually, if he gets tired in the later rounds and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, but but yeah, and shit like that. But overall, I'm gonna say that if I'm gonna say who I think is gonna win this fight and shit like that, I just, it's hard for me not wanting to pick Gary Antoine Russell, and also it's like, it's like, I want to pick him, it's like I don't want to pick against him, but you know what I mean, like that's the thing and shit like that. I just feel like right now and stuff like that, I feel like he's a great talent, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And overall, and stuff like that, like I want him to do good, so it's just more of like if it's somebody that I'm wanting to win and go for, and shit like that, I would want, like I would want, Gary Antoine Russell to win, and shit like that, But Hiroka has a lot to win for too, because his name would be on the map, bro. Another Japanese, like another, like basically like another Inoue, like now they would treat him as, like it's the big stage and shit like that, you know what I mean? And, and like literally, man, and shit like that, like seriously, like they would literally treat him like glory, bro, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, he would like get treated like absolute fucking glory, and shit like that, and that's the most important thing, and shit like that, but at the same time, I just feel like, Gary Antoine Russell has good power, quickness, and shit like that, you know what I mean? He knows how to set up his punches very well, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that. Even though he's a lot of the time more of the smaller fighter and stuff like that, you know what I mean? But I just feel like he's still gonna get the job done, and stuff. And I'm predicting, I'm predicting either, I would say, like a close fight, but a deserved unanimous decision, or I would say it's gonna end up being like where, where Gary Antoine. Actually, yeah, I'm gonna say where Gary Antoine. I'm gonna go with the stoppage. I want to see a stoppage, and stuff like that, or a knockout, So I see Gary Antoine Russell walking him down, like later on in deep waters, and shit like that, and then eventually and stuff like that, stopping Andy Hiroka, and shit like that, you know what I mean, or knocking him out, and shit like that, like and stuff like. I am gonna say I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, he could knock him out because, I mean, this is going to be a lot of power for, like, after just sitting on the couch. And I'm not saying just sitting on the couch, but I'm just saying, like, but it just not being in the ring is, like, and not, fighting people. That's like being on the couch, you know what I mean? So it just, he's going straight from being on the couch to, to fighting a really good fighter at 140 of Gary Antoine Russell, and stuff like that, you know what I mean? So I don't know, like I don't know if that chin is gonna be prepared for this at this moment and shit like that, you know what I mean? But we'll see, because at the same time, I mean, Asian fighters do got a great chin, and shit like that. But shit, I mean, we seen what the fuck Brian Norman did to Jin Sasaki, and shit like that, like he, like, I said that same thing and shit like that, and predicted a closer fight, but he just knocked him out, you know, in that fight, you know, and shit like that, you know what I mean? And exactly that's what happened. Like full like flattened him out in that fight, you know, and shit like that, you know. So like let's see how it's gonna be and shit like that, you know, when it comes down to Andy Hiroka and shit like that, you know, because I'm just saying, bro, like, this is going to be a power, bro. So, yeah, you know, but my final prediction is uh, I'm going to go with a knockout where he walks up like, in the later rounds to deep waters, and he's going to knock him out in the later rounds. And I'm saying Gary Antuanne Russell is going to knock out Andy Hiroka in, like, I would say like round 9. I'm gonna say round 9, you know, and stuff like that. It's gonna be a good fight though. But Hiroka is gonna be leaving some openings, and it just it only takes a few punches, you know, and shit like that, you know, to get somebody out of there. And it could be the same thing, you know, too for Andy Hiroka, but it just like point of view, you know how these black fighters are, bro, and shit like that. It can only take a few punches in a combination and shit to end shit, you know, like we know how to really dictate, like, to generate our power and shit like that. Like, we're very smart on using different ways to trick you of how we're hitting you and utilize different techniques and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, you know? Like, other people do that too. I mean, like if you're a boxer, you know, and if you, and like, natural, I mean, people know how to do that, you know, but that's our natural instinct that, like just any black person, it just, you know, boop, boop, snap that punch and shit like that, you know what I mean? Like I'm just saying and shit like that, you know what I mean? Like I'm just saying and shit like that, you know. So like instead of just go straight forward and maul them, like you got bing 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 bing, use your foot. But street fights sometimes you have to really like, you know, like it ain't the ring, so it's just like, you know, you gotta, you know, it's more about getting the more like the more damage, you know, and the more collateral damage and shit like that, you know what I mean? And that's the thing and shit like that, you know what I mean? But yeah, you know, and shit like that. But my final prediction is going to be Gary Antuanne Russell by a 9th round knockout over Andy Hiroka. And yeah, but thank y'all for watching this. Oh yeah. Also, next we gonna go with oh yeah. Let's actually. Yeah, we gonna have to. So actually, you know, I'm gonna make another video, another clip for that, you know, and stuff. Save some space for sure, you know, on my phone and stuff like that, you know. So actually, you know, I'm gonna go to another, you know, video right after this, you know, and shit like that, you know, and yeah, you know, and stuff like that. But I got Gary Antuanne Russell by a 9th round knockout. Thank y'all for watching this video. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. And make sure you guys tune in into my next video. And yeah, peace out.